I could punch you right in your face like a grown man. I won't. And then we gonna fight. You won't do shit. So I'm now the chairman of Revolt with a pathway. You see, because he wants to trigger me, and I want you to acknowledge that. So I'm now Cam's boss, the chairman of Revolt with a pathway to acquisition.
A new fire beef just lit up the hip-hop world, and it's wild how far dudes will go just for clout. Dame Dash straight up lied, then turned around and threatened somebody on camera. Yeah, he really went that low. But trust me, Charlemagne wasn't having it. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how he clowned Dame and handed him his butt for the whole world to see.
Get us on deadline.
Can you stop yelling? Can you stop interrupting me, please? So, Deadline didn't make the announcement for this particular situation. They didn't want to.
When delusion meets reality, the moment Dame Dash began making his grandiose claims about being the chairman of Revolt TV, you could almost see Charlemagne's eyes light up with the opportunity that had just been handed to him. What followed was a systematic dismantling of Dame's credibility that was both brutal and surgical in its precision.
If someone gives someone a loan for $180 million,
yes,
and I have no debt, who's worth more?
The billionaire.
The audacity of this claim was staggering, but what made it even more remarkable was the casual way Dame delivered it, as if he were announcing something as mundane as the weather. But Charlemagne, seasoned in the art of fact-checking in real time, immediately sensed something was off. The lack of any official announcement, the absence of any trade publication coverage, and the sheer implausibility of someone who just filed for bankruptcy suddenly becoming chairman of a major media company. All of these red flags were glaringly obvious to anyone paying attention.
No, you're not like me.
What you mean? You say you don't have.
Do you have a family office?
Money.
I bet my house is bigger than yours. I bet all my houses are bigger than you.
What's particularly fascinating about this moment is how it revealed the fundamental difference between Dame's approach to truth and Charlemagne's journalistic instincts. Dame operates in a world where reality is whatever he says it is, where grand pronouncements are sufficient to manifest success. Charlemagne, however, operates in a world where claims need verification, where credibility is earned through consistency, and where audiences aren't easily fooled by smoke and mirrors.
So, Deadline didn't make the announcement for this particular situation. They didn't want to.
The exchange about Deadline and trade publications was particularly telling because it exposed Dame's fundamental misunderstanding of how legitimate business announcements work. In the entertainment industry, major executive appointments are routinely covered by trade publications like Deadline, Variety, and The Hollywood Reporter.
And it ain't no disrespect, but I kind of think you're gay. You just act a little gay.
You got a problem with gay people?
Not at all. I've got a problem with people that pretend they're not gay. I could punch you right in your face like a grown man. I won't. And then we gonna fight. You won't do shit.
The absence of such coverage isn't a conspiracy. It's an indication that the announcement isn't legitimate or significant enough to warrant attention. But Dame's response to this challenge revealed even deeper problems with his relationship to reality. Rather than acknowledging the valid skepticism or providing concrete evidence of his claims, he became defensive and accusatory, suggesting that Charlemagne was somehow part of a conspiracy to undermine him. This pattern of behavior, making grandiose claims and then attacking anyone who questions them, has become Dame's signature move. And it's precisely what makes him such an easy target for someone as skilled as Charlemagne. The revelation that Revolt TV's CEO later confirmed Dame was not chairman, and that there was no acquisition path on the table was the nail in the coffin for Dame's credibility during this interview. But what made this moment so devastating wasn't just that Dame was caught in a lie, it was how the lie revealed the depth of his desperation and delusion. The financial contradictions that emerged during the interview were equally damaging. This exchange perfectly encapsulated Dame's fundamental misunderstanding of basic financial concepts. His attempt to argue that having no debt while being broke is somehow superior to being wealthy with manageable debt was both economically illiterate and transparently desperate. Charlemagne's response to these financial gymnastics was masterful in its simplicity. Rather than getting bogged down in complex economic theory, he simply pointed out the obvious contradictions in Dame's logic, allowing the audience to see for themselves how ridiculous Dame's position was. The moment when Dame resorted to claiming his house was bigger than Charlemagne's was particularly cringeworthy, because it revealed how far he had fallen from the sophisticated businessman he once was. This is someone who co-founded one of hip-hop's most successful labels, who helped launch the careers of multiple platinum artists, who built fashion empires worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet here he was, reduced to playground-level bragging about real estate in a desperate attempt to maintain some semblance of status. But perhaps the most devastating aspect of this confrontation was how it exposed Dame's complete inability to handle legitimate criticism or tough questions. Every time Charlemagne pressed him on facts, Dame would either deflect, attack, or make even more outrageous claims. This pattern of behavior has become so predictable that it's almost comical, yet it also represents a genuine tragedy. The public destruction of someone who was once genuinely influential and successful. The homophobic attacks that Dame launched against Charlemagne were particularly telling because they revealed how desperate he had become. When you can't win an argument on facts or logic, you resort to personal attack. When you can't maintain your position through reason, you try to undermine your opponent's credibility through bigotry. Charlemagne's response to these attacks was masterful because he refused to take the bait. Instead of getting defensive or angry, he simply turned the question back on Dame, asking why he had such a problem with gay people. This response not only deflected the attack, but also highlighted Dame's own bigotry and insecurity. It was a textbook example of how to handle a bad faith attack while maintaining the moral high ground. The physical tension that emerged during the interview was equally revealing. The fact that Dame felt the need to resort to threats of physical violence during what was supposed to be a professional interview spoke volumes about his mental state and his inability to engage in civilized discourse. But what made these threats particularly pathetic was their obvious emptiness. Dame knew he couldn't actually resort to violence without destroying what little remained of his reputation and likely facing legal consequences. So his threats came across as the desperate posturing of someone who had run out of legitimate ammunition in the battle of ideas. Throughout this entire confrontation, what became increasingly clear was that Dame was fighting a war he had already lost. He was trying to use tactics and strategies that might have worked 20 years ago in a completely different media landscape. Meanwhile, Charlemagne was operating with the tools and techniques of modern media, fact-checking, strategic patience, and the understanding that in the age of social media, authenticity and credibility matter more than bluster and intimidation. The systematic nature of Dame's humiliation during this portion of the interview set the stage for what would become an even more devastating aftermath as the public reaction and long-term consequences of his behavior became clear. But to understand the magnitude of this latest embarrassment, we need to dive deep into the context surrounding Dame Dash's current predicament and how Charlamagne Tha God once again exposed the former Roc-A-Fella co-founder for what many believe he's become, a shadow of his former self, grasping at straws while drowning in debt and denial. The deterioration of Dame Dash's public image has been a slow-motion car crash spanning nearly 2 decades. Dame Dash, now 54 years old, has been struggling financially for years with his empire crumbling under the weight of lawsuits, unpaid taxes, and what appears to be an inability to evolve with the times. His September 2025 bankruptcy filing revealed over $25 million in debt, including $19 million in taxes, making his claims of wealth and success increasingly hollow. This wasn't Dame's first rodeo with the Breakfast Club, and the history between him and the hosts, particularly Charlemagne, is crucial to understanding the dynamics at play. Their relationship stretches back over a decade, marked by a series of increasingly contentious encounters that have exposed Dame's growing disconnect from reality and his inability to accept accountability for his circumstances. The tension between Dame and Charlemagne isn't new. It's a slow-burning feud that has been simmering for over a decade, rooted in Dame's perception that Charlemagne is biased against him while being overly favorable to Jay-Z. This perceived bias has eaten away at Dame, who sees Charlemagne as nothing more than a puppet for the very industry forces that he believes conspired to destroy his career. In Dame's worldview, Charlemagne represents everything wrong with modern media: compromised, corporate-controlled, and fundamentally dishonest about the realities of the music industry. But Dame's paranoia about Charlemagne runs deeper than simple professional disagreement. It speaks to a fundamental misunderstanding of how media works in the modern era. While Dame operates from an outdated playbook where intimidation and bluster could control narratives, Charlemagne has mastered the art of strategic patience, fact-checking, and allowing problematic guests to expose themselves through their own contradictions. What makes this latest encounter so particularly devastating is how it perfectly encapsulates everything wrong with Dame's current approach to public relations and business. Instead of coming to the interview with humility, concrete plans, or genuine accountability, Dame arrived with his typical arsenal of deflections, grandiose claims, and barely contained rage. The very fact that he felt the need to set boundaries from the opening moments revealed his defensive mindset and his awareness that he was walking into hostile territory. This opening gambit was quintessential. Dame Dash attempting to frame the interview in terms of street credibility and mutual respect, while simultaneously positioning himself as the one granting legitimacy to the Breakfast Club platform. It was a transparent attempt to control the narrative from minute one, but it also revealed Dame's fundamental misunderstanding of the power dynamics at play. He wasn't doing the Breakfast Club a favor by appearing. He desperately needed their platform to try to rehabilitate his increasingly tarnished image. From the very beginning, D-Nay attempted to control the narrative by setting boundaries, a transparent attempt to avoid the tough questions he knew were coming. But what he didn't anticipate was how Charlemagne would use these very boundaries against him, turning Dame's own defensive mechanisms into weapons of humiliation. Dame's attempts to avoid embarrassment only served to make his eventual humiliation more complete and devastating. The gifts that D-Nay brought to the interview, books, and art pieces were another telling detail that revealed his desperation for validation and his misunderstanding of the interview format. Even these supposedly positive gestures were tainted by his problematic commentary, immediately setting a tone that would characterize the entire interview. The most telling aspect of this encounter wasn't just what Dame said, but how he said it. His body language, his tone, his inability to maintain composure when pressed on basic facts. All of it painted a picture of a man who has lost touch with reality. This is the same Dame Dash who once stood toe-to-toe with Jay-Z as they built one of hip-hop's most successful labels. But that version of Dame seems to have been replaced by someone who confuses volume with authority and desperation with confidence. The transformation is particularly striking when you consider Dame's actual accomplishments. Roc-A-Fella Records wasn't just successful, it was revolutionary. The label helped establish the template for artist-owned businesses in hip-hop, launch careers that are still thriving today, and generated hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. Dame wasn't just along for the ride. He was a genuine architect of that success, a visionary who understood branding, marketing, and artist development in ways that many of his contemporaries did not. But success in one era doesn't guarantee relevance in another. And Dame's inability to adapt to changing circumstances has been perhaps his greatest weakness. While the music industry has evolved dramatically, embracing streaming, social media marketing, and new forms of artist-fan interaction, Dame has remained stubbornly committed to approaches that worked 20 years ago but are increasingly obsolete today. What's particularly fascinating about this dynamic is how Charlemagne approached the interview. Unlike previous encounters where emotions ran high on both sides, this time Charlemagne maintained an almost clinical detachment, allowing Dame to hang himself with his own rope. It was a strategic masterclass in psychological warfare, where the host simply had to present facts and watch as Dame's own contradictions and delusions did the work for him. This approach revealed Charlemagne's evolution as an interviewer and media personality. The man who started as a small-town radio DJ has become one of the most influential media personalities in the country, precisely because he's been willing to learn, grow, and adapt his techniques to match the demands of modern media consumption. Where Dame sees conspiracy and bias, Charlemagne sees opportunity and content. The bankruptcy filing that preceded this interview cannot be understated in its importance to understanding Dame's current mindset. When someone files for bankruptcy claiming over $25 million in debt while simultaneously trying to project an image of wealth and success, it creates a cognitive dissonance that becomes impossible to maintain under scrutiny. Dame's entire appearance on The Breakfast Club was essentially an attempt to square this circle, to somehow convince the world that being $25 million in debt actually makes him more successful than people who work regular jobs. The bankruptcy filing itself tells a story of systematic financial mismanagement and an inability to adapt to changing circumstances. The debt breakdown includes $19 million in taxes, $650,000 plus in child support, $5 million plus in judgments, and $5.5 million in other debts. These aren't the kind of debts that accumulate overnight. They represent years of poor decision-making, failed business ventures, and an apparent inability to manage basic financial obligations. But perhaps most damaging to Dame's credibility is how his bankruptcy filing contradicted virtually every public statement he had made about his financial situation in recent years. For someone who had spent years bragging about his wealth, his business acumen, and his independence from traditional employment, the revelation that he was actually drowning in debt was devastating to his public image. Yet Dame's response to this financial crisis wasn't to acknowledge his mistakes, seek help, or demonstrate humility. Instead, he doubled down on his grandiose claims and became even more aggressive in his public statements. This pattern of behavior, responding to criticism and setbacks with increased aggression and more outlandish claims, has become Dame's signature move, and it's precisely what makes him such an easy target for someone as skilled as Charlemagne. The broader context of Dame's recent legal troubles also paints a picture of someone who has lost control of his business and personal affairs. His involvement in multiple defamation lawsuits, including a $4 million judgment for repeatedly making false claims about filmmaker Josh Weber, suggests a pattern of reckless behavior that has extended far beyond his financial mismanagement. These legal troubles aren't just about money, they're about credibility and accountability. When you repeatedly make false statements in public forums, when you ignore court orders and default on legal proceedings, When you continue to make defamatory claims, even after being ordered to stop, you're not just damaging your financial position, you're destroying your reputation and credibility. But perhaps the most damaging aspect of Dame's performance wasn't his financial contradictions or his aggressive posturing. It was his complete inability to present a coherent vision for his future. Instead of using this platform to genuinely rehabilitate his image or present concrete business plans, he chose to double down on the very behaviors that have alienated him from the industry in the first place. The interview revealed a man trapped in a prison of his own making, unable to acknowledge his mistakes or adapt to a changing world. While the hip-hop industry has evolved, embracing new technologies, new business models, and new approaches to success, DNA remains frozen in time, still fighting battles from 2004 and expecting the world to validate his responsibility for his circumstances and his persistent belief that the world owes him something because of his past achievements. What Dame failed to understand is that in the court of public opinion, past success only provides so much credit, and that credit has long since been exhausted by years of erratic behavior, failed business ventures, and increasingly desperate attempts to remain relevant. The aftermath, public reaction, and the final nail in the coffin. The immediate aftermath of Dame Dash's catastrophic Breakfast Club appearance was swift and merciless. Within hours, clips from the interview were circulating across social media platforms, generating millions of views and spawning countless memes. But unlike previous Dame Dash controversies, where public opinion was somewhat divided, this time the consensus was overwhelmingly clear. Dame had embarrassed himself beyond redemption. The revelation that Revolt TV's CEO had to publicly debunk Dame's chairman claims was perhaps the most damaging blow to his credibility. It wasn't just that he had lied during the interview, it was that his lie was so easily and quickly disproven by official sources. This wasn't a matter of interpretation or perspective, it was a flat-out fabrication that was exposed within hours of the interview airing. What made this revelation particularly devastating was how it confirmed every negative assumption people had about Dame's current mental state and relationship with reality. Here was someone so desperate for relevance and status that he was willing to make easily verifiable false claims on one of the most popular platforms in hip-hop. The desperation was palpable, and the public reaction reflected that. Charlemagne's analysis on his Brilliant Idiots podcast provided crucial insight into his strategy during the interview and his assessment of Dame's current state. This analysis revealed the calculated nature of Charlemagne's approach. He understood that Dame's erratic behavior and false claims would generate significant content and discussion, and he was prepared to leverage that for maximum impact. But more importantly, it showed how Charlemagne viewed Dame's current trajectory, not as a serious businessman or cultural figure, but as content to be consumed and discussed. The nickname Det Dash that emerged from this interview perfectly encapsulated Dame's current reality and became a viral sensation in its own right. The brilliance of this moment wasn't just in the wordplay, but in how it crystallized Dame's entire current situation into a single memorable phrase. The public's reaction to the Det Dash nickname was overwhelmingly positive, with social media users embracing it as the perfect encapsulation of Dame's fall from grace. What made this particularly brutal was how it contrasted with Dame's former reputation as a successful entrepreneur and his current reality as someone drowning in debt while making increasingly desperate claims about his wealth and status. But the humiliation didn't stop with the initial interview. Dame's post and Instagram response where he threatened legal action against Charlemagne only served to compound his embarrassment. Instead of acknowledging his mistakes or attempting to clarify his false claims, He doubled down with threats and accusations, further cementing his image as someone disconnected from reality. The legal threat was particularly hollow given Dame's well-documented financial problems. How can someone who just filed for bankruptcy with over $25 million in debt credibly threaten expensive legal action? The threat came across as the desperate posturing of someone who had run out of legitimate options and was grasping at straws. The escalating feud with Cameron that emerged around the same time provided additional context for understanding Dame's current mental state. This wasn't just another hip-hop beef. It was a former protege publicly calling out his mentor for lying and desperate behavior. The fact that Cameron, who owed much of his early success to Dame, felt compelled to publicly distance himself and call out Dame's dishonesty spoke volumes about how far Dame had fallen. The revelation that Dame had filed a $300 million defamation lawsuit against Cameron was perhaps the most delusional development of all. The idea that someone who just declared bankruptcy could somehow claim $300 million in damages from defamation was so absurd that it bordered on the surreal. It suggested a complete disconnection from financial reality and legal logic. What made this entire situation so tragic was how it represented the complete destruction of Dame's legacy and reputation. This is someone who genuinely contributed to hip-hop culture, who helped build one of the most successful labels in the genre's history, who launched careers and created opportunities for countless artists. Yet, through his own actions and inability to adapt, he had become a cautionary tale and a source of entertainment. Charlemagne's reflection on the interview and its aftermath revealed a mixture of entertainment and genuine concern. While he clearly enjoyed the content opportunities that Dame's erratic behavior provided, there was also a recognition that they were witnessing the public breakdown of someone who had once been genuinely influential and successful. This reflection highlighted one of the most tragic aspects of Dame's current situation: the way his behavior was tarnishing not just his own legacy, but the memory of what Roc-A-Fella Records represented at its peak. The label wasn't just a business success. It was a symbol of Black entrepreneurship and creativity, a demonstration that artists could control their own destinies and build lasting wealth. The contrast between that legacy and Dame's current behavior couldn't be starker. Instead of serving as an elder statesman who could mentor young entrepreneurs and share hard-won wisdom, he had become a cautionary tale about what happens when ego and delusion replace business acumen and authentic relationship building. The broader conversation about mental health and accountability that emerged from this incident was perhaps its most valuable contribution. While it was easy to laugh at Dame's antics and enjoy the entertainment value of his meltdown, there were also serious questions about whether he was getting the help and support he needed to address what appeared to be deeper issues. The public nature of Dame's struggles raised important questions about how we consume and respond to celebrity breakdowns. While his behavior was certainly worthy of criticism and even ridicule, there was also a human being at the center of this spectacle who appeared to be struggling with issues that went beyond simple business failures or personality conflicts. Ultimately, this latest humiliation of Dame Dash by Charlemagne Tha God served as a masterclass in the power of preparation, patience, and strategic communication. Charlemagne's ability to remain calm under pressure, fact-check claims in real time, and allow Dame to destroy his own credibility was a demonstration of media expertise at its finest. But it also served as a cautionary tale about the importance of accountability, adaptation, and authentic relationship building in maintaining long-term success and credibility. Dame's fall from grace wasn't just the result of bad luck or industry conspiracies, it was the predictable outcome of years of refusing to take responsibility for his mistakes, adapt to changing circumstances, or maintain the relationships that had once made him successful. As the hip-hop community continues to process and discuss this latest chapter in the Dame Dash saga, one thing is clear. His reputation and credibility may be damaged beyond repair, and his ability to return to genuine relevance and influence appears increasingly unlikely. The man who once stood as a symbol of entrepreneurial success has become a cautionary tale about what happens when ego and delusion replace wisdom and authentic relationship building. The final judgment on this confrontation is clear. Charlemagne Tha God didn't just win this battle. He exposed the fundamental emptiness of Dame's current position and left him with nowhere to hide from the reality of his situation. In a culture that values authenticity and accountability, Dame's performance was a masterclass in how not to handle adversity, criticism, or the basic requirements of honest public discourse. That brings us to the end of this video. For more interesting videos like this, click on the cards on your screen.